My name is Leora. I'm the school mental health lead for the Pacific Southwest MHTTC. I'm here with my colleague, Kelsey Schmitz. Kelsey, did you want to say a little bit about who you are and then we can get started?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Kelsey Schmitz. I'm the school mental health lead for the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. And our region covers Alaska, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. And I'm located in Olympia, Washington. It's really good to see so many of you that I recognize that are joining. And it's nice to have others on too for this important conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm Leora. I mentioned earlier, she, hers, Pacific Southwest MHTTC, and we support the U.S. Pacific Islands, Hawaii, Nevada, Arizona, and California. And so today, Kelsey and I are joining forces, as we frequently do, as the West Coast Mental Health Technology Transfer Centers, because we know that all across the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, and California, that the historic and contemporary realities of leading school systems and communities through and after wildfires are real, and they're present, and they're right in front of us. And so we are coming together for a virtual town hall, and we have invited thought leaders and folks who've been on the ground, from principals to school support professionals to superintendents to state departments of education, multiple roles, to come together to share their lessons learned, challenges, and their navigation wisdom, both in the past and in the present, and what we know is true that will be in the future. So again, welcome. You are with us for leading our school systems and communities through and after wildfire. So Kelsey and I mentioned that we are here as part of the MHTTC network. So again, Kelsey is the Region 10 up north from us, and we are Region 9, so there's that brown and green on the left coast. And just a very quick sentence, if you are new to us as MHTTC partners, that we were funded in 2018 from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration to provide no-cost school mental health workforce development support. So that means at the time it meant in-person trainings. Now it means virtual trainings and town halls and resourcing and webinars and coaching. And so you can definitely contact Kelsey and me if you are in your respective region. If you're not in our region, you're also welcome, because we know that wildfire is not just a West Coast thing. And we know that there's a lot of transferability between wildfire and other global warming and climate change disaster related navigation challenges. So many of you might be kind of doing some wildfire, hurricane, tornado, or just general, wanting to listen and learn and hold. And so if you are not part of our regions, you're still very much welcome. And if you're interested in getting in touch with your region, let us know, and we can definitely do a warm handoff. And Kelsey, I wanted to pause to see if there's anything else you wanted to say about MHTTCs.
Nope, I think you did a great job.
Okay, excellent. So on that note, this is the disclaimer that while we're grateful for funding by SAMHSA, that everything shared and expressed today are of the viewpoints of the speakers only. So that is our disclaimer. And again, we're grateful for the funding, and that today is a conversation and the opinions expressed are of the speakers themselves. We want to remind all of us today that we're bipartisan, and that again, every opinion expressed is really from the speakers themselves. And there might be some shared common experiences across our speakers. Okay, that brings us to our conversation today. So I'm going to take a deep breath, welcome you to do the same. For the almost 80 folks on the conversation today, welcome. My name is Leora. I'll be moderating today. I'm the school mental health lead for the Pacific Southwest MHTTC. This is in collaboration with the Northwest, and we're here to sit in listening, learning, and asking around how to lead school systems and communities through and after wildfire. So a couple of caveats. The first is that we have two leaders from Washington, from Oregon, and California. And we know that their experiences might provide resonance for you, but they are really of themselves only. So they're not speaking as a Department of Education or as a superintendent for everyone. This is really, they're sharing their own wisdom. The real feel of today is hopefully and intentionally conversational. So we welcome our speakers to be in agreement, disagreement, sharing resources, and being in conversation. The truth is that especially when we are leading through big challenging moments like wildfire, there are some things that we know, and there's a lot that we don't know. And so we've encouraged everyone who's coming on to speak to also be really vulnerable and share lessons learned so that we can kind of be in this moment of what wisdom do we need to cultivate together and what unknowns are we still holding. The last piece that I want to offer is that one, we know from Washington, Oregon, and California, this isn't just a existential conversation. This is a real happening in this moment conversation. And one of our speakers is in the real-time process of navigating evacuation and supporting his community. And so you may see Ed on and you may see Ed off. And that is because we know Ed as principal needs to take care of his community. So I just wanted to offer that caveat as well. All that to say, I'm going to invite our speakers to come on to video. I'm going to stop the share so that we can focus on the speakers. And again, I want to say thank you so much to Matt and to Rachel and to Jeannie and to Grace and to Lori and to Ed. And I am going to invite you to go around. I'm going to make sure that I have my order right. We're going to go Ed, Matt, Lori, Jeannie, Grace, Rachel, and I'll remind that one more time, but we'll do Ed and Matt first. And so the question is, in this moment, nope, I'm going to do one back up. If you can introduce yourself, your name, your context, what brings you to this conversation, and one thing you're doing to regulate lately. So who you are, what brings you to this conversation, and what are you doing to regulate lately? So we'll go first Ed, then Matt, Lori, Jeannie, Grace, Rachel. So Ed, you're up, and Matt, you're on deck.
All right, well, welcome everybody. I am Ed Navarro. I'm principal of both Rincon Valley Middle School as well as Santa Rosa Accelerated Charter School. We are located in Santa Rosa, California, which is, I'm sure you're aware, in the midst of the Shady Fire, the Glass Fire, and we also experienced the Tubbs Fire in 2017. So in 2017, I had about 127 of my students lose their home. The fire line was, the firefighters actually, my school was the fire line. Everything across the street is gone, and they were able to save my schools. So I lived it, and I'm continuing to live it again. We just returned from evacuation about 12 hours ago. And as I was saying in our pre-conference, there are still lots of sirens around and lots of smoke in the air, and I'm getting lots of texts. So I may be in and I may be out, but I'm more than happy to share whatever I can, having gone through it and going through it again. What am I doing to self-regulate? I'm guessing you don't want to hear gin and tonics, but there have been a few of those. Really just communicating. It's really easy to pull yourself into a hole, and you know, for a significant amount of time, it's going to feel like trying to get a drink out of a fire hose, and everything's just coming at you at full force, and you have to be able to breathe. Yeah, you know, we get tired of hearing it, but put your oxygen mask on first. It seems so trite and cliche, but the reality is we really have to, so that we can take care of our staff, we can take care of our students, we can take care of our community.
Good luck, Ed. I know where you're at, man. My name's Matt Redham, and I am the School and Community Wellness Advisor in Butte County, California. Butte County, California is currently the site of what we call the Bear Fire, or the Northwest or the West Complex Fire, which encompasses currently Plumas, Butte, Yuba. And we were the site of the Camp Fire in 2018, which included the devastation of the town of Paradise and the town of Concal in Magalia. I was originally, I'm a clinician by trade, but I was a consultant for trauma-informed systems and and trauma-informed care. And I was also displaced as a result of the fire, so I was out of my house for about 6 months. And I at that time was working for myself, and I went to the county office of ed and began helping out 2 days after the fire. And then I asked them for a job, and they gave me this one. And I don't think any of us know quite what my title means yet, but one of the things it means is helping our systems understand how to collectively heal, right? And that is that is very hard to quantify. That is very hard to operationalize. It's hard to package and practice to fidelity. And the reason that is because those things are not what's needed. What's needed are humanity in these times, and a sense of how do we balance what are innumerable needs in our communities that oftentimes are exacerbated by the context that existed before the fire happens. And so that brings me to the work, and at this point I don't know that I know how to do anything else. So I'm excited to be around people who are displaying their humanity and navigating what is, I know what it's dealing with is, there's nothing as intense and as stressful. So I'm just glad we all get a few minutes to just be.
Thanks, Matt. So we'll do Lori, Jeannie, Grace, and Rachel.
Matt, I can echo that sentiment. That stress, that intensity is, it's exhausting. Good morning, everyone. Lori Dent, proud superintendent of Sumner Bonnie Lake in Washington State. And just want to say hello to my counterparts in Washington State that are here. Thanks for joining us today. The intensity that surrounds this type of event is indescribable unless you've been through it. And I'll tell you, this is actually my first experience. And Leora, I appreciate you saying that it's a very personal experience, because really what I can share today is a lived experience. I don't speak for all superintendents, but I can definitely tell you that we train for an all hazards mitigation, but it quickly turns into an all human mitigation, and we fall back into what we value in this community, and we took care of each other, and we put our arms around each other and loved each other through this crisis. And if I can share anything, it's how we used our relationships and our love for one another to really make it through this time, because this was our first experience with the Sumner grade fire. Our first experience with a wildfire. We're in that recovery mode. We went through the response phase, and I'll tell you, it was something unlike we had never experienced, because we went from a power outage to a wildfire to air quality issues. It was just a domino of crises, and I'm excited. I'm honored to be here amongst you all, probably emerging in my learning, and again, excited to hear the conversation. And I'm here with Jeannie, so I'm not going to take all of this story, and blessed to work with practitioners like Dr. Larberg. So thanks for having me today, and if I can add anything to the conversation, happy to do so.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Dent. One of my thoughts, I am Jeannie Larber, Director of Whole Child in Sumner Bonnie Lake School District, and really thinking whole person in the situation of wildfires. Really the goal is, how do we help and support not only our educators and our students, but our whole community. And I think Lori explained it quite well, that wrapping our arms around each other and really doing some of that recovery work is that outreach and caring for each other helps us heal. And I really believe that we together are still learning. it was complex for us because we already had a problem with COVID and learning to go to distance learning on top of wildfires, evacuations, no power, people lost food, and then trying to deal with air quality and not going back to school like planned. And as we know, in any kind of crisis or trauma, that predictability and routines are so important. And yet it was thrown up in the air and just trying to create the best situation for everybody in our community. So thank you for inviting us. And again, just learning from all of you is going to be fabulous today, and I appreciate this opportunity.
All right, Grace and then Rachel. So briefly, who you are, what brings you to the conversation, and then a quick, if you'd like to offer something that you're doing to help regulate.
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation to be here to the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, and hi to all the folks in Oregon. I see a lot of you popping up in the chat, so it's just a pleasure to be here. And it's a pleasure to just be amongst such amazing colleagues and partners in this work who I haven't met until today, but it's just really wonderful to be here. My name is Grace Bullock. I am the Senior Mental Health Strategist for the Oregon Department of Education. Oh my gosh, why am I here? So many of the whys have been articulated already, dealing with mental health issues in response to COVID, in response to fires and smoke, and it's just been a really overwhelming time. I'm in Eugene. I'm not that far from the Holiday Farm fire. The fires here, as I'm sure Rachel can speak to very eloquently, are unprecedented for our communities. This is something that's very new. They came very quickly and did a lot of damage. So really, I come to this department and this work having been a psychologist in private practice, having worked in schools, having worked in Flint, Michigan in response to the water crisis as a consultant, and thinking that I'd probably seen the worst of the worst in terms of communities that were suffering the ills of nature or human in the case of Flint. And I'm inspired because our communities are incredibly resilient. And you know, these are devastating events. They are heartbreaking events. And it's amazing to see how communities rebuild, how we come together, how we inspire each other. And so I'm grateful to be here today. One of my greatest concerns is our communities in Southern Oregon that have been hit incredibly hard. Our Latinx, our communities of color, our tribal communities have been very disproportionately impacted by COVID and now by the fires. And as a state, we're constantly working on this issue of workforce and the need to recruit and retain, particularly you know, for our communities of color, people that are linguistically and culturally attuned so that they can be served the way they need to be. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. What do I do? What do I do to keep myself sane, or at least try to keep myself sane? I have a dog you may see wandering around behind me. He's a big source of support, and I practice a lot of yoga, and I'm surrounded by amazing colleagues. Some of them I believe are going to be here. But I think that just the team that I am blessed to be a part of is a big part of what keeps me going. So thanks again for the opportunity to be here.
All right. Hi, my name is Rachel George. I'm the principal at Sandy Grade School in the Oregon Trail School District in the state of Oregon. And in fact, there's a lot of folks that are neighbors that are on this call that are in nearby districts. So just want to give you guys a shout out. We also have a fellow firefighter, Bill Stewart, here on the line. He is a smoke jumper, or used to be, and now he's like their big MTSS whole child approaching Gladstone. So we're in really, really good company here. Like Grace mentioned, my background is actually in fire. My last day in the Forest Service was just a couple days prior to starting my job as an administrator down in Southern Oregon in a community that was significantly impacted by the Biscuit Fire, which up until recently was one of our larger fires within the state of Oregon and the history of it. In fact, I lived at the ranger station for the first year when I was an administrator. So it's very much a part of who I am. It's interesting. We had our power shut off during this epic windstorm that they were anticipating in Oregon. It's the first time in Oregon history where PGE or a power company has been proactive has shut that down. And ironically, our little strip of highway and forest, because I live in the forest, it's not around as many people. It's kind of quiet. I like it. That we were kind of out of harm's way. It was a couple ridges over, but unfortunately, from where we stand at my building, we watched the Riverside fire blow up and grow acre after acre and run 15 to 12 miles a day. And had some communities significantly impacted, ours too. But I got to tell you, we have some folks on this panel, or not on the panel, but in the chat room and as participants that were significantly impacted and were really tested and pushed and extended with their skill set, their compassion, and their energy, because it was pretty traumatic for all of our families and for our leaders too. So really, really happy to be here. Really happy to be able to speak to both sides, that education and fire side, because this experience has really led me to understand that we speak very different languages and have a very different skill set. And sometimes they don't always merge super well. It's kind of like the IEP meeting that you're sitting at and you're throwing out all these acronyms and you're speaking in educationese and the family doesn't know what you're talking about. And these are very critical times where if everybody's not on the same page, things can go awry. And I think that there's lots of great things to celebrate, and there's also lots of great ways to improve and help support families and students and staff. So excited to be here. My self-regulation tactic is to run, but when smoke quality and such wasn't an option, my go-to strategy, which kind of shows a little bit of a glimpse into my brain, was to pull fire reports and to pull all the different Forest Service and BLM and interagency reports out of the National Interagency Fire Center to help make sense of what was going on in the chaos around myself and to help inform others and not rely solely on the news. So that was my go-to, inform myself. So happy to be here.
Thanks, Rachel. And we're, so clearly we know and we can hear the incredible, both personal and professional lived wisdom that folks are holding on this in this conversation. And so I'm going to field the first question to Ed and Rachel. And I want to just offer for all of us that we have so much to say, and also we don't have all the time to say it this morning. So if you do have more that you wanted to offer as a speaker, feel free in the chat box to add more thoughts. But I am going to ask you as much as possible, and it pains me to say this, to keep thoughts as held as much as possible. So the first question is for Rachel and Ed, and I want to hone in on your experience as principals, and then we'll go to Grace as a state leader and Matt and others as systems and school district leaders. But first to Ed and Rachel, how has leading through wildfires expanded or changed or deepened your understanding of what school mental health is, should be, and can be?
I'll go ahead and take it. It really opened my eyes to a whole different level of what student mental health could look like, and it really threw into the mix the PTSD that I just had never really, I had dealt with it as, trauma that happened at home and individually, but never community-wide trauma, and the PTSD that's triggered after that. So it really helped us build relationships with our SAY counselors, our social advocates for youth counselors. We really built relationships and referral systems for them, and it just really became part of our everyday. We deal with trauma, and we have systems in place, and some of those systems continue to work, and other times we just needed to reach out. So we were lucky to be able to have community come to us. We had lots of school psychologists who worked with our district and just came. When it really became crucial was when we came back to school, because we were out of school for 2 weeks for the Tubbs fire. Back when we could actually go back on site. I don't know what it's going to look like this time around, where it's day by day and we have some systems in place, and hopefully they transfer to a web-based model, because I just don't know how we're going to do it.
Thanks, Ed. So for me as a building principal, it really drove home the focus and the need to really dive in and just focus on people and safety. And people and relationships are always number one when you're in a building or in education. But this is a different style. I believe it truly is. And it's putting their personal safety, their personal life first. You know, talking to a lot of administrators and staff, they felt guilty going home to evacuate, you know, where it was hard to leave. And they felt like they were abandoning their kids. And as leaders, we really needed to give permission of like, no, you need to go home. You need to leave this meeting. You need to take care of your family. And even speaking with some administrators that were staffing relief centers or evacuation locations where Red Cross was, that was hard to then leave, right? When the evacuation orders were then updated and then they needed to leave and go take care of their family. And I think we just really need to remember to give that flexibility and to really state like, you need to take care of you. You need to take care of your family. You need to be able to process that. Because oftentimes when we're in emergency situations, right, it's hard to leave your job, especially when it's very much a part of who you are. And that's the same thing in fire. There's been a lot of fire deaths and accidents where the fire is going to overtake the firefighter and you're like, drop your chainsaw and run, right? Like you don't need to continue to pack that, but it's just ingrained into us so deeply that this is our job. This is our job to take care of people, that we literally need to sometimes be beaten over the head and say, no, go home, take care of yourself. And that falls into, you know, supporting practices with when you're coming back, that grace needs to be extended. And we can't say that enough because they continue to doubt it. We continue to doubt it. We worry that people are going to think differently of us because we're with our family or evacuated. So just really want to emphasize the family, the focus on people and safety.
And it really, if I can jump in, what I found is that it really varies, that everybody obviously needs different things, but there are, you know, the people who lose their homes, and then there are the people who lose their homes and their work. And then there are people whose grandparents lost their home. And then there are some who just evacuated. And although there's trauma there, you know, there's this guilt of, oh, I just had to evacuate. I'm okay. Well, you might not be. You know, that was still traumatic, and you had to drive through fire in your minivan to get to where you were safe. So everybody needs something different.
Yeah, what I hear in that, Ed and Rachel, and I saw a lot of voracious nodding happening. I mean, I at least was voraciously nodding. And what I hear too is the importance as a principal to center educator wellness, educator well-being, safety, and relationship, so that then, and what I also heard in that is to manage the oppression wars, like who has it worse. And I also heard a third piece, which we'll get to later, around the complexities of this time in COVID. So we'll bring that up as a whole group later. And then the fourth piece, Ed, and I think, I forget who else brought this up, is the equity piece, that we don't come to the conversation around wildfires on an equal playing field for all the reasons, for class reasons, for social determinants of health reasons. And so for you as principals, having to navigate multiple layers that folks are grappling with, and most importantly, to validate that whatever someone is holding, they are holding it. That's what I heard. And Rachel, I want to go back to you very quickly before we go to Grace. You are a unique person in this conversation because you've been in both spaces. You've been a fire professional. I'm going to use that term. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And now as a building principal. And so I'm curious if you might offer us what you've learned in code switching. What have you learned? What do you wish that school leaders knew from the fire perspective and from the fire perspective about school mental health? And then we'll go to Grace.
Yeah, great question. I think the acronyms is a huge deal. They're like two circles that, it's like a Venn diagram that's not a Venn diagram, and there's no overlapping. I think the overlapping that you could find is if you had gone through some of the FEMA ICS trainings in a command system, and those are processes that, you know, they carry across floods and natural disasters. That would be the one commonality. And that's if your district has spent some time with that process and doing natural disasters. The huge gap that I struggled with was that in fire mode, you're in initial attack, which is that first 24 hours of putting a fire out and trying to triage and figure out what's going on. And you don't have time to talk to the media or talk to the stakeholders. You're putting fire out, and you're doing it as fast as you can and trying to assess the needs and keep people safe. From the other side, there was a huge information vacuum, and there were some key stakeholders that had information, but not all the stakeholders had the same information. And it was incredibly challenging to make educational decisions about whether you cancel school, whether you delay school, whether you send staff home, when do you start school again, what's the fire going to do? And I think that that's also why I went into, and it drove my husband probably nuts, probably learned a lot about fire within a 2-week time frame, more than he ever wanted to know, to pulling the reports and trying to analyze and literally take the fire Forest Service information and translate that to help local folks. I think the piece that I would really encourage moving forward is that a lot of our superintendents, a lot of our educational leaders spend time developing relationships with fire, like the fire department in the city, or the county, like Clackamas County Fire. But have we extended that outreach and that partnership to the Forest Service, to the Oregon Department of Forestry? Have we looked at those other resources? Because those are the folks that are going to be the initial tack, like first boots on the ground with the fire, and that you're going to need that connection with. And if we don't have that partnership with before the incident, it's going to be really challenging to do it in the moment. The second thing that I would look at and try to tweak and refine is how can we get better information out to our stakeholders and to our educational leaders between the initial attack and then when a team comes in. It's night and day when, I'll back up, when an incident command team comes in, and those are national resources, and they come in and they're like a well-oiled machine. They have an incident commander, they have an operations person, they have a communications person. Like, it's just like, here you go. And they're rock stars, and that's their job, and they do it every day and they train for it. How can we communicate and be really, really solid in that initial attack stage for when the fire starts to when that team comes in? Because that's the most crucial time for our families, because the wheels are coming off the wagon, we're crashing, it's blaze of glory and fire and everywhere. And that's when we need the information to make decisions, and good decisions and safe ones for all of our families and staff. And I think that there has to be a better way to do that, while also being cognizant of the number one need and focus that fire folks have is that getting the fire out and protecting people. That's a lot. That's a big exhale.
That was a big exhale. I think, the piece, and we're moving to Grace, and Grace as someone at the State Department, part of what I heard in Rachel was both how to how to get out of the way, and also how to make sure that the way is supported as much as possible for those who need to be in front, and secondary and tertiary. And so, listen, let's be honest, state departments as well as local districts can be both supporters and sometimes hinderers, particularly when it comes to crises. And so I'm curious, as a state leader, what have you learned in this moment around what state departments need to do differently to support local leadership and to support principals like Ed and Rachel and folks in superintendent roles? What is the learning at the state level right now? And then we'll hear from Jeannie and Lori and Matt. Yeah.
That's a great question, Leora, and responding to that could take well over an hour, because we've learned so much, and we've learned how much we need to learn. Just to reaffirm what Rachel's saying, and actually let me back up for a second. So the Oregon Department of Education works incredibly closely in partnership with the Oregon Health Authority. And this is a relationship that we're really building very intentionally, because the Oregon Health Authority and our wonderful partners there are, unlike a lot of different other state education agencies, they hold the responsibility for school-based mental health and school-based health centers. They hold the responsibility for public health. So there's a tremendous amount of coordination that goes on there. And we've been in constant conversation with them and our superintendent association. I won't throw the acronym out, but at our association of school leaders, and had pretty much continuous conversations about what we need to do better, what we need to do differently. To reaffirm what Dr. George said, one of the big pieces of this, because this was so new for most of the school districts affected, was we realized that those partnerships between oh my gosh, I'm trying not to use an acronym. Those partnerships between between the emergency incident response folks, between the public health folks, between the people that needed to communicate, the Department of Education, the Health Authority, and those local partnerships. So we have a lot of superintendents and building leaders that move around a great deal in the state. And so one of our conversations we had just this morning is, what kind of orientation do we need to do when we have those people moving? I think it's going to be essential as we move forward to have conversations about that and create a system, and maybe it's an orientation of leaders, so that when they move into a new district, they know who the players are, they know who the people are, and so they're not finding themselves in a situation where they're scrambling to figure out where the resources are, or they're scrambling to get the information. Because unlike Dr. George, most people, I mean, even in our local fire here, we had evacuations all around us, and I was constantly looking to see, and the maps were moving, and, you know, schools were the hub and the evacuation center, and then they weren't because they were in the path of the fire. So, yeah, I mean, so much learning. I think other pieces that we've been holding even before the fire were all of the, the issues around COVID and mental health service delivery and places where we need to improve. And we're very much in the midst of an intentional effort to evaluate the landscape of mental health in our state, and really understand where the strengths are, where the gaps are, where the needs are, where the opportunities are, and what partnerships we as a state agency need to form with our affinity groups and with our community-based organizations, with our families, with our students, so that we can make sure that we're covering all of those needs to the best of our ability. We're also in the midst of, as you all know, with Portland, we've got a lot of unrest in the state, and that's been occupying a lot of our time and attention, because the issue of racism in schools has become further exacerbated by those events, but also in general. I mean, this is not new to COVID, and it's not new to our current political climate, but it's definitely been exacerbated. I just say one last thing before I jump out. I'm concerned about the focus that these events have brought up on trauma. I'm concerned about the way that the conversation about trauma has been evolving. I do believe it is necessary that we recognize that trauma has occurred, and that we use healing-centered approaches to help support our communities in healing. I'm concerned when the narrative is focused on trauma that we will be focusing more and centering more on deficits and what's not there, and fixing what's broken, rather than focusing on looking at the strengths in our communities, looking at the resilience in our communities. Very statistically, the number of people that develop PTSD and trauma symptoms after moving through considerable events like this is remarkably low. And I want to make sure that when we think about how to respond, that we're responding with solutions that honor and recognize the strengths and the capacities of the people in our communities, that we're there and fully equipped to provide services to those who need additional support, but that we're not centering the narrative around trauma, and that we're really elevating health and well-being as being the cornerstone of education, but also doing that through a strengths-based lens. And that includes partnership, it includes community. And so these are all of the things that we're learning, and we're trying to move forward as a state agency. And I saw a number of folks that popped up on the chat when this first started that are partners in that effort. And yeah, it's going to take a state, not just a village, I think, on this one to really create a culture of care and compassion and change, where when these things happen, we're able to address them from a place of humanity, particularly in a divisive time.
Thank you, Grace. Yeah, I think that's such a wonderful segue to Jeannie and to Lori and to Matt, because we want to think about how what I heard from you so powerfully is how not to assume the deficit paralysis pathology, but to lift up the not only strength, not in a way to obviate harm, but in a way to focus and lift up and amplify the wisdom of many communities that have navigated big things before, big things now, and big things coming up. And I think Matt is that. Matt and Jeannie and Lori, if we move to student support services and superintendent roles, I think the question to what Grace brought up is, what does leadership, like what in your experience, what does leading student support services systems through a trauma-informed lens, through response, and then to recovery, what does that look like? And I know, Matt, you've gone through many different iterations of this. Ed, I'm looking at you too. This is for school systems, but this might be a time for us to think about what does leadership look like when there have been multiple things and when you have experienced one thing, and then how we can inform each other. So that was a very long question, but mainly, Lori, Jeannie, Matt, what does trauma-informed wildfire leadership look like? Systems in the response and in the recovery. And Matt, do you want to go first? Maybe you can take it first.
Yeah, I can. I think. So I happen to agree with Grace fully that there's this very delicate line between how we name what we've really started just calling adversity, and how we recognize that it is a very complex, it's a very complex reality that involves, you know, mental health, it involves pathology, but it also involves the realities that community exists in currently and have existed in. And so when we look at how does a system, for example, a system that in and of itself responds in very much the same way a human body does when it gets over capacity, right? So it either becomes incredibly rule compliant and rigid and hyper focused on the rules and policy and protocol, or it becomes very jaded and withdraws, much the same as a body does when it's under extreme stress. That you almost have to predict that however much work you have done on your system and the culture of your system, that it will be impacted to a degree that really you can't plan for exactly the reasons that Dr. George and others have mentioned here. You have to balance such complexity, while also, if you live in a rural or semi-rural area like we do, you are impacted as well. There's no question. And so we know in Paradise, 90 to 95% of teachers lost homes. Many of them drove through flames with kids in the back of their car. So you had multiple levels of impact, not just for folks in the burn scar, but folks in each and every system. And so the system is asked to engage in what we call trauma-informed system work, complexity thinking, which is to balance different realities, different needs, to often have to make choices that do not have a win involved in them, but that have the least worst option, and that is a part of the work. But also centering things like relational leadership, centering trauma-informed communication, really balancing how predictability and transparency can be lifted up in a time where there is so much we don't know. There are so many things happening at once in such a short amount of time. And this is just in the response phase. These things become equally as paramount as you move through what we call, what is called recovery and renewal. But you have to understand, there will still be large segments of a system, large segments of the community that when other pockets are in recovery and renewal, they're still in response. They're still in a double wide trailer with 3 families to this day, almost 2 years later in Paradise. And it's hard to argue that they're necessarily in a place of recovery. And so as a leader, what we really recognized is to balance the extraordinary complexity of what you're trying to do, to be inward focused on having a read on how your system is actually doing, how your staff is doing. How do you even find out how they're doing? How do you keep track of everybody? And then you deal with the various needs that folks have. typically what people do not want right away is to talk to a crisis counselor at all. And if they do, they don't want to talk to somebody from the federal government. They want to talk to some face that they know. And we saw this happen time and time again. We'd have crisis counselors set up, staff would walk in and they'd come right to us, or they'd come right to and just start talking. So a lot of times you have to be incredibly nimble in how you're viewing the situation, because it is never static. And that iterative process that continues to shape and reshape and form and reform really happens for us to this day. And that is compounded by multiple adversities layered on top of one another. And so the system really is the middle management. It lives in the middle of individual traumatic stress, individual adversity, and community adversity, and state and sociopolitical adversity. And so our ability to impact change and to move, oftentimes, as we all know, if you work in a system, you're beholden to other folks, but you're also beholden to other needs and other realities and other policies that exist within our systems. So we have found that transparency, letting folks know how decisions were made, is primary. They may not agree with them. Like for example, Paradise had to start school within 3 weeks of the fire. There weren't any schools. They were in Orchard Supply Hardware in Chico and at other sites around. They didn't have a choice. Their choice was simply, we ask them to come back to work or we don't have a district. Neither of those were awesome. But if you allow staff and the system to understand how that decision was made, you will probably put a barrier between animosity and resentment that could exist months from then, and you deal with it in that moment. And so we found that transparency, holding space, allowing folks to express their concern and moving forward was one of the primary sort of competencies that we asked leaders to demonstrate through this.
So, Jeannie, Lori, I know Matt just offered so much richness. I'm curious what resonated for you, what was different, similar, what's coming up, and please open it too if other folks want to talk about complexity thinking and transparency, etc. Jeannie and Lori.
I'd like to go back to something that was addressed from the superintendent level. Rachel, I think you brought up something about the information vacuum. And if I could offer anything, it really does boil down to relationships. And I'm telling you that if you have a strong network of relationships, and I'm very blessed to have been in this district for 22 years, and and Jeannie, feel free to jump in because you're such a great partner with me. But even when I became the superintendent, from day one, it's about developing a network of resources that you can fall back on, that when things like this happen, you do get in the way. As a superintendent, I protect this district like it is my family. And I call the police chief, I call Bud Backer, our fire chief, I call the mayors, knowing that they are so busy. I need information. I need evacuation maps so that I can give them to our GIS expert, so that at the height of our evacuation, I knew that 1,701 students were evacuated. And I become human very fast and know that school is not a priority, but being a human is. And we had to delay school for a week. And what we did is we took care of our families. Our principals and our staff, many of whom are in this chat, we mobilized quickly through our relationships and our resources. This was like just heartwarming. Our local school districts around us, they had trucks of food and supplies brought into our district just based on relationships that we had to help get our families back on their feet. So it's the network of resources and relationships that you establish as a superintendent that will sustain you. It's not your relationship with the State Department, because I can tell you, they never called me. And I'm not sure what, I don't know what they could have done anyway. You couldn't even get up you couldn't even get up 410, which is one of our major highways, right? So it was those that were around me that took care of me so that I could take care of my district. And then even at the political level, Matt, that you were even talking about, I so appreciated the phone calls from Senator Murray and Congressman Heck, who wanted to know, how can we help? And while there is such an appreciation for mental health services, I think there's a clear lack of understanding for access for mental health services, whether it be transportation or even right now in a virtual setting, what do students need and how do we give them access? So truly it goes back to relationships, resources, and picking up the phone and just talking to people, right? Leadership is about relationships. Jeannie, what would you add to that?
I appreciate, Lori, what you were talking about, the relationship. I think it also goes back to what Grace was saying in the fact that chronic stress is chronic stress, and it can be debilitating, and yet we have to focus on those skills that we need, as well as those relationships to build that thriving individual so they can be resilient. And I love focusing on the strength, and I think that's the key. And Dr. Dent did a fabulous job in our district of really focusing on the people and the relationships in our own school community and empowering our principals as well as all our educators to be the best they can be, and knowing that it comes from this internal calm and reassuring that we're going to get through this. And without that leadership and focus of, this is a crisis for us, this is new, and yet there's lots of complex things that have happened, and we're going to get through this. And that belief system that we are better together, and it's truly about this servant heart and relationships that we're going to make it through this. I really see that as key piece in a leading in any kind of crisis is important. And so I have that privilege of working with Dr. Dent, as well as many other fabulous administrators and educators in our school district that believe that the whole child, in the sense of their behavior, their social, emotional, their mental health, and their wellness is what we focus on. We call it mental wellness in our district, is priority for our adults to help our kids. I think those are key things that has led us through right now these turbulent times, and we're going to keep using that because it has been a benefit for us.
Thank you.
And I think one of the things I just want to reinforce is, like, you know, the campfire was unique in that it leveled the entire town. So it's important to keep in mind that there's not uniformity in every fire. However, what we once saw as an aberration in our county and in Northern California especially, and Ed is testament to this, we now see as a pattern that needs to become part of our thinking. And the truth is, like, what we talked to staff about early on, and because training is obviously the lowest hanging fruit when you're in response, but it's also nobody's brain can handle it. So and we heard that loud and clear. We had a lot of trainings for folks, and people were like, you know, I can't focus on that. I can't integrate this information. But what we learned to do, you know, this latest round of fires, many of the people who were evacuated from Paradise moved to Oroville, just got evacuated again. There was people up in Oregon who went from the campfire to Oregon, and they got interviewed. And so the ability to predict for your system and staff what is going to happen before it happens is incredibly soothing. So that if you tell them you are going to have what we call campfire brain or smoke brain or now COVID brain, you're not going to be able to attend as well. You're going to have periods of fogginess, and that's completely normal. That normalization, we find people continually tell us how important that is to them to this day. Because when you go through crisis or you're stuck in that survival mode, your brain is trying to catalog everything familiar all the time. So you drive by that particular gas station, that tree, that parking spot, reminds you and your system, your physiological system, that there is some predictability and normality and you're going to be okay.
That's right.
They lost that completely. All of those things were gone. So the only consistent reminder they had were the faces and the relationships of the other people. That was it. And to this day, it's the same because the town looks completely different. So that relationships, they are at the center.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Lori and Jeannie. And what's coming up for me too, and Ed, I was thinking about you at the very top of this, is also, I keep seeing in the chat box, and I've heard you say in different ways, humanization and validation. And what we have more questions coming up, but I want to also just remind us, like, as humans, the HPA smoke is one of the most primal activators for our body's stress response. So anytime we're smelling, imagining, sensing smoke, it is literally what our bodies are built to do, is to go into response mode. And so part of what I hear all of you talking about is how much you as leaders, the work is actually to remind people of their humanity, like the most primal way. And so I'm gonna not elegantly shift to the next question, which is open to everyone, which is about what Ed mentioned at the top, this time of COVID. What are the challenges in leading through wildfire, school mental health, in response and maybe in recovery, but mainly response in the virtual space? And what are challenges and what are lessons learned, maybe opportunities for innovation? And I'm curious, Ed, I know you're kind of sitting literally in the moment, in the 12 hours afterwards, but I really want to name COVID, and then I'm just gonna cue you that we're gonna move into what some folks have been putting in the chat box, and I know is important to all of us, which is not only a conversation around equity, but around historic and indigenous and intergenerational disenfranchisement and communities that are navigating multiple pieces. So that's coming up. And right now, COVID, which we also know is layered with the same discussion. So just wanted to open that up.
Well, our evacuation centers, we look very differently. We have a system, unfortunately, and now that system just didn't work. Our evacuation centers were inviting families to bring their cars to the parking lot, and families who had cars were using cars as their evacuation center in the parking lot of the fairgrounds, so that they could at least have a safe place, but it was not a comfortable place. Not that an evacuation center is ever comfortable, but it was in their car, and that just adds a whole nother level of fear and uncomfortability. And now I think about how are we going to build those relationships with our kids. I know how important it was the last time to, one of the stories that hits me deep in my heart is when we came back to school the first time, and there was a student that I had that, he was a great kid, and I had a relationship with him, and he got out of his car and he was kind of bouncy and happy. We had lined the streets, my teachers had, with signs just of welcome, just to create some kind of, happy space for our kids when they first came back. And he got out and he was super happy, and I was kind of surprised because I knew he had lost his home. And he walked through the line, and then he saw me and he just ran towards me, and then he just hugged my arm, and he just said, I just need to tell you, I lost my house. And he just started crying. And, here's an 8th grade boy who, you don't really, I have a relationship with him, but I didn't ever see that level of emotion from him. And I just remember, I just had to hold him and let him know that we were here and we were going to do what we could. And I knew it was tough. How am I going to do that this time? Now we're in am I going to give a hug through a screen? I don't know how I'm going to do this. Yeah, so it's a whole different level, and we're going to figure it out. We're going to do it. We're going to figure it out, and we're going to support our kids. So if you have any answers, I'll take them.
No, but that expression of humanity, Ed, is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, to this day, we still, this is a necessity in our systems, right? We need to abandon the misnomer that if we're, this unfounded belief that if we are human, somehow we can't also manage how our system responds, which is ludicrous. And I think my biggest concern is the same as Ed's, is social isolation is the worst thing for recovery, period, of any kind. And we focus, there's a lot of focus on the concept of self-care, and we've really tried to move away from that language because we don't heal as human beings as a self. That is, it's not that these things aren't good for us. Like, I look great in yoga pants and I can stretch to my knees. It's a great thing. However, I need my colleagues more than I need anything else. I need my children. I need the dude who works at Sev that I see every day. I need that guy. And so we have really shifted to this place where, how do we begin to think about maintaining connections when we are not in the same room? And I'd be lying if I said that is complicating things to a degree that is you almost feel completely helpless, because we can't even figure out how kids are doing. We're using Kelvin, we're using Care Solace, we're using technological, innovations to try to get a sense of how kids are doing. But it is painful, because oftentimes when we're under duress, we go to what we're competent at and we have mastery at, which is, how are our kids doing? And I know this kid. When you can't even find them,
That's right.
to staff, it's just another blow to that competency.
Rachel and Jeannie, Lori, Grace, like, what's coming up for you up north? Maybe you have wisdom for us down here in California.
Well, what's interesting is that Ed, Jeannie, and I had this exact conversation just a couple days ago about how do you reach kids in this virtual era right now, in a recovery, in a time of recovery, and it's just killing me. And Jeannie, it's just interesting that Ed brought this up, because we were talking about this in a normal time. We would bring kids together, we'd bring staff together, we'd be out and about trying to help staff heal and recover. And it's like, what do you do? So I so appreciate the conversation right now, because it actually makes me feel a little normal, like I'm not the only one going through this. So thank you. But I don't know what to do. And so just to hear you say that from someone who's been there is comforting. I love an answer. But it's funny, Jeannie and I just had that conversation.
I think that's exactly the hardest thing of this that's the complexity of it, is that not being able to know that every child and every educator in our entire district are okay. It's just so hard, no matter how we try to do this Zoom virtual empathy and all those. It's just so hard. And as our community reached out, I'm thinking of a couple situations. We're so worried when people started bringing all this food to our buildings. We're like, do they have masks on? Do they have gloves on? And people were getting this panic feeling of, we got all this structure, and some of us, I heard over conversations over time, like, who cares? It's really about taking care of each other. And I know we did everything we could to safeguard, but in reality is really that human touch, that touch of our hearts and that relationship. We're hurting. We're hurting not being able to be there. And I think that's the hard piece.
Yeah. And Rachel, I saw you unmute. Go ahead.
Yeah. This is something that I struggle with, and you guys are spot on that there is no easy answer. And having that isolation is a huge, huge barrier and a challenge. It was a barrier before wildfires hit, let alone historic ones that we weren't anticipating in certain areas, especially on the west side of Oregon. And my staff, actually, I appreciate this. They really called me out, and they were like, we need more time together. we need more meetings. And I'm like, want more meetings? Who wants more meetings? I can put this in an email, even though they don't have, I mean, they have access to email. They can check it whenever they want. But they were really outspoken. They wanted more time together. And even with that being virtual, that was better than nothing in their opinion. And so usually we might go once a month with check-ins, with kind of social events. And that was something they wanted to embed in a weekly basis, or on a weekly basis, and to be able to check in. And so we've incorporated that consistently on a time frame that worked for everybody. It's not mandatory. They do fun activities, or they just chill and talk virtually and be able to connect, because we are in a comprehensive distance learning mode. Our district is all virtual at home. A lot of the metro areas in Oregon are. Some of the rural areas are just starting to open up with just K-3. But a lot of distance learning and a lot of isolation. Even if you're teaching from the building, you're alone in your classroom with the door shut. So that's been really helpful. We've also incorporated weekly check-ins. Every Monday, our staff does a check-in about, hey, how you doing? What are some celebrations? What are some things you're struggling with? What are some things that I can do to help? And then I follow back up and I check in with folks, and people have been really honest about areas that they're really rocking it, and some areas that they could use some more assistance. You know, this last week, self-care was a big topic that came up. And that's a fantastic thing, because we've been talking about that a lot over the last couple of years. So I'm always really thankful and proud of them when they can identify that. So we'll incorporate some more of those practices. But it's a trial and error. And I think, you know, it goes back, Lori, to your point about relationships and knowing your community, and asking them, right? Giving that opportunity for voice and what their needs are. And also understanding that we don't have to have the answers, and that they can probably solve it themselves if you open up and have that forum for how would you like to connect? What are the things that you need? And then you can brainstorm some of those different parameters. Like they wanted to do a potluck, bless their hearts, like last year. I'm like, can we do a virtual potluck? How might that look? So just, you know, clarifying questions, but they're so innovative that they do great work when they have an opportunity to share their voice.
Thanks, Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
Grace, did you have a quick, I have a last question for us that I want to hold time for, because it's coming up in the chat. So I'm not sure if you have a quick.
I may be your segue. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, just so much beautiful communication, and just, you know, like what Matt reaffirmed and others did as well, that social isolation, I think, has been our biggest demon through all of this, in that from a mental health perspective, from an educational perspective, the strategies and the tools and the things that we would do, reaching out to kids, reaching out to families, reaching out to each other, all of those things have been really impaired. And it's hard to heal in community when we can't be with our community. I think that, you know, thinking about it from different perspectives, the human perspective, the state perspective, one of the things that, you know, we're doing a lot in our team is just holding a lot of space and grace for people to be where they're at when they show up. You know, one of the interesting things about COVID is that I see my colleagues' kids now. I see their dogs, and I mean, there's just ways of getting to know each other that we've never had accessible to ourselves before. We're using a lot of humor. We're just having to find humor, because this, let's face it, I mean, this is some of the hardest times that most of us have lived through as professionals and as humans with our own families. And just holding a lot of space and grace around agendas. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a meeting with an agenda and decided that, you know what, I think it's just better that we hang out and see how we're doing and make sure everyone's okay, and have, you know, we text each other, how you doing? Are you okay? If you see someone in a meeting who's looking like they're, you know, having a rough time, reaching out, because even though we can't connect in person, which I do believe, you know, physiologically and psychologically is what is, you know, needed, there are a lot of ways that we can reach out and create a lot of space for those human connections in these times. And I think that everyone here is probably doing some wonderful, beautiful, innovative things to make that happen. But I think the biggest gift we can give ourselves and everyone else is just a lot of space, a lot of grace, and just hold that space and make that be okay, rather than pushing through agendas and academic content and making sure that, you know, that's done. I think that, you know, in the absence of health, nothing else is going to happen. So just centering around that.
That's right. Thank you.
Oh, I forgot my segue, but go.
Okay. So, you know, I'm naming this. So obviously if I'm going off script, but I'm also responding to what came up in the chat box and responding to what needs to be centered. And so we've got about 10 minutes. So I'm going to really offer us to be attuned and thoughtful about our contribution to this question around equity and justice in the context of leading school systems through wildfire. And particularly, Ed, you mentioned, either was Ed or Matt, forgive me, who mentioned, students lost their homes if they had a home. And I think that piece around what are we coming into the crisis with or without, and what are we creating and navigating with as school leaders, with a very sharp critical analysis of class, of access, of resourcing, of privilege. And so it's a big question. I'm not asking us to tackle everything. And I want to be clear, Whitney in the chat box really named our indigenous families, community members, and students and staff who we might serve. So I want to kind of layer that on and offer you to add one piece of learning in that very complicated question. One piece of learning or knowing in that complicated question.
Go ahead.
Go
ahead. Yeah, I mean, for us, it was simple. I mean, we learned that you can't be reactive with racial consciousness. It's not going to happen. If it hadn't happened before the fire, it's not going to happen during. And so what we did was we took that reality and we basically pushed on our system to address racial and social justice. And we used our data and our statistics that exist far beyond the fire, exist in expulsion and discipline rates, especially in my county. And we said, look, if we're going to heal equitably, we have to do the root cause of why we're in this position, that most of the people who had to leave Paradise and could never come back because they didn't have, I mean, these are the same marginalized families that sadly, there's segments of our community that, wipe their brow and said, well, they're gone. This is great. So we ask our system to be critically self-reflective when it comes to what we have seen. And we use the crisis as another impetus for us to address something that we've been terrified to address typically in our system. So.
And what I found was a lot of our families who were lower socioeconomic, not only did they lose their homes, but they lost their place of employment as well. And where I had our fire was very unique, or maybe not so. It was what I'm trying to say is that it came up over the crest of the mountain. It devastated one of our more affluent communities. It came down the side of the mountain, jumped the freeway, and damaged some of our lower socioeconomic communities, and then also our, general suburban community. I mean, it really crossed all barriers. So our affluent families, many of them either had the ability to rebuild or the means to relocate. And our lower socioeconomic communities were forced to relocate without having the means to do so. And we saw that was really, really hard, because where were they relocating to? It wasn't good. It wasn't good, but it was at least someplace. And it was really hard if they were able to relocate within the same community and still continue to go to school with us, they went from a bad situation to a terrible situation to now one that wasn't good at all. And how do we support that is really how we struggled. And we created space at school. If you need a place to do homework, I mean, we understand that you're living in a household with 4 families who are all in a bad place right now. We just try to create space for them and support them in that respect.
I just want to make note, and this is no shame, no blame, of the fact that this panel is composed of people that are, for the most part, entirely white, and that one of the things that we're finding, I mean, we hear stories constantly. We hear stories of migrant families who had to flee Southern Oregon, migrant and Latinx families, undocumented families, scattering across the state. You know, their school folks who know the families well, they can't find them. The families are afraid to go looking for FEMA funds because they're not documented. They're staying with relatives and living in their garage because they're in Section 8 housing and they're afraid that if they're found out, then the whole family is going to get thrown out. I mean, our Indigenous families have been disproportionately hit by COVID, and then fires and then floods. And so I think the point I'm trying to make is systemically, we have huge lifts. And I think that probably the most tangible thing that we can do in the moment is elevate the voices of those that are affected. And I mean, I think it's great that we can try from our places of privileges and our agencies and our districts and our leadership roles to make sure that we're paying attention to equity, make sure that we're centering equity, make sure that we're practicing equity. But ultimately, I think from a trauma-informed perspective and everything else, we have to give our communities of color voice and choice. We have to create opportunities for them to be heard, because the dominant culture it's white, and it's going to be white for the foreseeable future. And if we're really going to truly serve our families well, we have to create opportunities and listening sessions, and we're doing this. But we have to create opportunities to have them be heard and really honor that. It's not just like, okay, we're going to give you a listening session. Lovely. Thanks. Thanks for playing and see you later. No, we have to create and change our systems. And we're working really hard with the Oregon Health Authority to look at different solutions, like how can we bring traditional health workers and community health workers and trusted partners into the equation of mental health, so it's not just the predominantly white workforce of mental health providers that are serving our families. We've got beautiful resources in communities. We have faith leaders, we have healers, but they're not recognized because they're not part of our traditionally, white centric, and I'm part of it. So, full disclosure, but we've got to recognize the people that are supporting our communities of color and elevate them and elevate the voices of our communities so that they're served. Because what we're doing now, what we've done traditionally, it hasn't worked, and it's nobody's fault, but I think it's about time that we start really paying attention to that in a meaningful way and make some systems change. And that's part of what we're doing. So, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm preaching.
You're not sorry. There's a lot of resonance, and I want to, before we move into our close, I'm grateful for the wisdom of Brittany Packnett-Cunningham, who at the top of COVID said, we're all in the same storm, but we're all in the storm in very different boats. And to think about how that then informs this conversation, not only in identity, positionality, and historic both disenfranchisement and dehumanization, to bring that up, but also in the way in which we lead students differently, educators differently, principals, superintendents. I mean, there's been so much, both what are both the shared and how are also the different leadership practices. And that's been the through line in this whole conversation. And of course, I want to be really clear. I hope that there's head nodding to this, that there is in no way and no how attempt in 3 minutes to do a full unpack of the 16-19 pandemic in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, and with the layer of wildfire. And so especially if that in the chat box, if that's coming up for you, and or if you are someone who would like to offer your voice of experience, please in the chat box let us know, so that we can make that happen. Make that happen. I'm taking a breath because I'm punctuating, and we're gonna do a rapid round. This is a rapid round, really rapid, of if you were to tell your past self before wildfire leadership, if you were to tell your past self one thing, what would it be? And I'm just gonna go on my screen. So we'll do Matt, Rachel, Jeannie, Ed, Grace, and then end with Lori. If you were to tell your past self one thing before wildfire leadership, what would it be? Matt.
I would probably tell myself that you're about to run a marathon you did not sign up for, and this sort of heroic excitement of the first month will not last long, and a year and a half in, you're going to be tired and you're going to be angry still, and you're going to be confused at times, but you will be changed in a way that will exemplify that sort of resilience and that sort of growth and that strength that Grace and others were talking about. So I would just like a little pep talk, you know what I mean? Like squirt the water bottle in my mouth and then on.
All right, Rachel.
Mine would be that anything can happen. Just because it hasn't happened before doesn't mean that it won't in the future, and that we need to be ready. We saw coastal areas burn. We saw national forests that I've worked on and lived in that we call the asbestos forest go up in flames, like California. Things are unpredictable and you just need to be ready.
Thank you. Jeannie?
I think one of the pieces that I'm thinking encompassing everything is giving people grace, as well as myself, that sometimes we're just not going to know everything and be able to do everything just perfectly right. So grace is one of my thoughts with the combination of all these other stressful events that have happened.
Thank you. Ed, past Ed.
I would tell myself about the longevity of this. It doesn't end when you think it's going to end. It just keeps going, and everybody's healing at a different rate from different things. I wish I would tell myself there's never going to be an answer that's the right answer for everyone, because everyone is looking at this from a different lens, and that's okay. Lead from your heart, get the information that's available, and make decisions and things that you can stand behind, because you're going to have to stand behind them.
Beautiful. Grace?
I can't tell you how many meetings I've sat in the last, 9 months, but particularly the last few weeks, where I've been thinking, as recently as this morning, oh, I should have thought of that. I should have thought that we needed to connect superintendents with emergency resources and all these people. I should have done this and I should have done that. And I realized that, I'm shooting all over myself. And if there's something that I can take from this, it's that, there are, and this sounds really distorted and I apologize, but there are so many opportunities that are coming from COVID and from fires that are going to allow us to do something differently. Now we know it's needed, and it's our responsibility to create the systems and the policies and the practices and the legislation and the funding streams that are going to do something about this. And, kind of like what Matt was saying, we're all like in the blaze of glory right now. Oh yeah, let's respond. But what's going to really matter is what we do in the long term and how we take the lessons of these events and really create systems change at a deep and meaningful level and a sustainable level. And I think that's what I'm holding on to that gets me through this, because marathon, I think we're in like Iron Woman number 4, and that's just 2020. So much gratitude to all of you for doing so much heavy lifting here.
Thanks, Grace. All right, Lori, last short, sweet to past Lori advice.
Oh, there it is. Finally, I could unmute. 2 quick pieces. First, I always try to be the leader that I would want if I were in this situation. And 2, I would try to get more sleep.
Thank you. Oof, that is real. Well, I want to say on behalf of myself, the Pacific Southwest and Northwest, we want to say thank you. I really want to offer everyone in the chat box for support of our speakers. If you can, you've already been doing this so beautifully and generously. If you can put in the chat box a takeaway, something that you heard, something that really resonated, or a piece of learning that you'd like us to continue moving forward, so that Matt and Rachel and Jeannie and Ed and Grace and Lori can get some resonance, can get some affirmation and validation of their own humanity. And of course, we'll send this to them. We're hearing over and over again, thank you, leadership is relationships. Lots of gratitude for your wisdom and your leadership. So I'm going to wait until some come in and allow the speakers to take a breath and read some of what's in the chat box. So continue to put your perspective in And I just want to offer, oh, see, Darcy, amazing. You got the capital all caps. I want to offer one piece, which is that so we'll be posting on the event site, we'll be posting this recording, and we did start to collect some resources to support you moving forward. There's actually some really good recent research on the impact of wildfire and mental health that just actually validates in print what we know in our bodies, but also important to have that. And we also want you to know, I'm going to end here knowing that there are helplines at the end as well if you need support. And we will stay on for about 5 minutes after the hour, though I know that many of you need to exit in case you have questions or you have other pieces that you would like to name. But again, Kelsey, I'm going to invite you to come on video. And I want to say on behalf of the Pacific Southwest and Northwest to our speakers, we are so grateful for you. Ed, we are with you. I know you are in it. So what enormous generosity to carve out this time. And we're all with you. And on that note, we're going to close for today. And if there are follow-ups that you would like, more extended conversations, please let us know. So again, Rachel, Lori, Jeannie, Matt, Ed, and Grace, much gratitude for your complex, deep human and rehumanizing leadership with us this morning. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Leora said. Just a really important conversation to have, and appreciate all your leadership and your care and compassion, and really insightful and helpful. And I can tell from the chat and the interactions that we've been having throughout that this has been extremely meaningful for people that joined from all over the country. So thank you again.
All right, well, with that, we are going to stop recording. Rachel, Lori, Jeannie, Matt, Ed, and Grace, if you need to exit, we understand. Kelsey and myself and our team, we're going to stay on for about 5 minutes to just see if there are follow-up questions that are needed, but we're so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you all for your support. I really appreciate it. And as generous you're saying this is, it actually was really helpful for me to be in this space and to talk about it and be with people. So I thank you all for your contributions.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and good luck, Ed. We are with you in spirit.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. What a great opportunity for people. I really appreciate it.
And likewise, thank you.
So good to know we're not alone. I mean, it's a sick, twisted thing, but it is like, oh, thank God.
Okay.
That's good to know. Once again, I'm not insane. All right.
Yeah. All right, wonderful.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.